Oh yeah,
Go
that's right.
ahead, Brian. You got a question.
Yeah, so going back to No Place Left, Nathan and Chuck,
Yeah,
just I know that the purpose of this call and recording is to kind of maybe recenter and refocus the vision of what is No Place Left exactly. And I know that for us, a couple of things that I'm seeing, and not just in Austin but nationally. So a lot of people are, and myself included, have started focusing on the first part of Romans 15 for No Place Left, talking about the gospel being fully proclaimed. And so something that's passed along a lot is there'd be no place left without the good news of Jesus. No place left without the good news of Jesus, the gospel of Jesus in San Antonio, in Austin, in America, in the world. That's a rallying cry. I'm just curious. Do you see that as an accurate application of No Place Left? Obviously, it's not the full breadth of it. We talked about the five parts earlier that you can get out of Romans 15 and Acts 20, but just on that
yeah.
specific issue, do you think it's a correct use of No Place Left vision? And then also too, just something that I use, but I'm just looking for either a little affirmation or a little rebuking and discipleship. Is just the connection between Romans 15:23 and the idea of the gospel being fully proclaimed, and Matthew 24:14, and
Okay.
and then also how does that tie into the Great Commission and all of its different instances, and in particular to Acts 1:8. And so just so again, so yeah, I know. Sorry. So um,
Okay.
yeah, so I was just wondering what your thoughts on, what kind of connection is there between all those things and all those verses, and how do we make all that work in terms of casting vision for different groups of people?
Chuck, you want to start on any piece of that?
uh, I will because you're throwing the hot potato towards me, and I always do that to other people.
Okay.
So I'll submit to that authority. The and then you can come behind me and clean up my mess. I think Brian's question is interesting after having gone through Romans 15 and Acts 20 and filled out the four field strategy, that in the context, no place left is more than the gospel. It
Yeah,
is the whole strategy. And
yeah,
so I think, and I did not think about this until Brian asked that question, no place left is leaving behind a platform for sustained movement. It is not just sharing the gospel with everyone.
hmm
So that really changes my paradigm. And I really appreciate Brian's question. Okay, so I've said enough.
You know, I think that when your question, just to repeat, is gospel saturation a right starting point for those who are trying to pursue and apply a no place left vision?
exactly.
And I
Yes,
would say the answer to that is yes. It is the right starting point.
but it's not
It
the
is
whole.
not the finish line.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So, in fact, a gospeling movement, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
You think about even the last 20 years, we've seen a number of gospeling movements.
Mm-hmm.
Evangelism explosion,
Mm-hmm.
faith evangelism, right? Even if I can say without coming across as criticizing, these are incredible movements of God. Even the four spiritual laws with Campus Crusade that they
Mm-hmm.
standardized, and for 30 years, man, you knew if they started with the first spiritual law, you knew what was coming next because it was they campaigned that, right? It was a gospeling movement. Even the J film, a gospeling movement, but realize that a gospeling movement, the wind of a gospeling movement will blow. It can blow out pretty quickly
Mm-hmm.
if there is not, if it's not connected on its heels, almost like a set of waves that need to hit the beach. That gospeling wave, entering gospeling wave, is that first wave in the set, right? there has to be a discipleship wave, and a wave of church formation, and a wave of elder overseer development and investment, identification, and a wave of broader leadership development to go out and train others how to do all those, create other sets on other beaches, to carry the metaphor to a paint in there, you know? So it's the first wave in a set, and it's essential to start there. But you could accomplish that task, you could get a gospel buzz across the whole of the U.S., and if we don't follow that up with disciple-making tools, vision, at the right time, in the right balance, connected, right? If we don't follow up with church formation, then we've got no reset button where the DNA is reset generationally. Where church formation is lacking in church planting movements, where church formation is not your reset button, you find yourself looking outside for authority, for vision casting, for member care, for resourcing. And when you're looking outside to an agency, you're really not doing generational multiplication. It's really not the four fields anymore. It's the four fields plus an outsourced agency that can send people back to the first field. That's not churches planting churches. Are you with me? So if we don't go all the way around to healthy church formation, we've got no sending base, no authority base, no shepherding base, no accountability base, no resourcing base to send the next generation out. To do what? To engage and can carry on generationally the gospeling ministry. So saturating Texas, where you're at, with the gospel will burn itself out pretty quickly, like a grass fire. It'll burn itself out pretty quickly if you're not following up with genuine disciple-making and body life, church formation, that can reset and send the DNA generationally to go out and start even more fires.
Okay. So, absolutely. So, it's just good to know.
Now, the other
it's a good starting.
The other part of your question is really interesting,
Yeah.
Matthew 24, Acts 8. So get back to that in just a second, but go ahead with your comment.
No, that's what I was just trying to take it. I was just making sure. So in our context, Garrett Lawrence and I were just recently talking, and it's when we talk about a movement of the gospel. When you talk about the gospel with existing believers in churches, there's a lot of unity around the gospel, which obviously, praise God for that, right? And then you can even start to transition, again, in terms of vision casting, start to transition into using movement of the gospel language, and their heads are still going up and down. There's some consensus about that. And then we were just talking a couple weeks ago about, okay, well then there's even more, some of them are ready to talk about movements of disciples. There's unity about that. And then obviously we're thinking movements of churches planting churches. And so we're just talking about slowly walking down, meeting them wherever they're at and letting the obedience of their lay people drive their unity around that. So I just wanted to make sure that, obviously we understand, and my understanding of No Place Left Vision continues to grow, but just wanted to make sure that it's okay to start with a movement of the gospel, even though obviously it is much more than that. And so that's really helpful. And so with the Matthew 24:14, how does that tie in? And then with the Acts 1:8, in our context here, and I think I would say even growing within the U.S., there's more and more unreached vision, seeping into the Western church context, which is awesome. Obviously biblical. Obviously, you're sitting amongst the unreached there in India. That's what got me into the game. As I gravitated towards a Western church that had strong unreached vision, and I wanted to be about that. And now the question is, how do we effectively equip and send people to the unreached is where we're all kind of at right now. And so that's that Acts 1:8 piece is, when you equip everybody to obey Jesus in their Jerusalem, then how does God take people from their Jerusalem to their Judea to their Samaria and then to the ends of the earth. And what does all that look like? And as a Western mind, I want to immediately go to, well, you do Jerusalem, then Judea, then Samaria, and then you do the ends of the earth. But that's not. God is much more fluid and cyclical than that. And so just tying all that together, how do you understand those things? Because that's just where I am personally, is trying to understand all that.
Yeah. Well, I do believe that the local church, Acts chapter 13, is the agent of sending, number one. I think it's a lot of what you talked about, and where are our starting points, where do we actually campaign. Movements beget movements. So if you will, there's no need for a disciple-making movement without an evangelism movement up front, right? And there's no need for a church formation movement unless there's new disciples being made who have a desire and a need for new community. So that campaign of movement, it's not, you have to be careful for just the sequentialism, that it's this, then it's this, then it's this, because clearly there has to be a gospel movement inside your discipleship and a gospel campaign inside your church formation, or those will also be anemic, right? It's not just that they build on one another, because it is cyclical. Evangelism fuels church formation, and for that matter, church formation fuels evangelism, because it's a right function of the church. And discipleship fuels entry strategy as they go after the reteaching paradigm of their lostness and their oikos or otherwise. All those tasks are so interconnected in a web, it's wrong to try to separate them, but they do feed off each other at the same time, right? One is actually a prerequisite to the next. So, for example, you could spend your time campaigning church planting movement, church formation movement. Let's start new churches. And if you're not campaigning gospel up front, you're just reshuffling the believers, and you're making no dent in losses. How much of our church planting and church growth paradigms over the last 15 or 20 years, particularly from 1990 and following, have followed that pattern. A church formation movement without any entry in evangelism, right? So that we can shuffle and we're just doing transfer growth. That illustrating your point. I think that even back to the way you asked it the first time, the Matthew 24, the Acts 1:8 piece, Paul could with integrity say there's no place left for me to work in these regions in pursuit of the fulfillment of Matthew 24 or Acts 1:8, without being so self-deluded as to think he'd accomplished it. Right? That said, so in other words, there's none of us who can say, no place left and pack your bags because the second coming is at hand. We know it's imminent, but it has nothing to do with the completion and fulfillment of our strategies, right? I say that just as an asterisk, and then I'll say, I do believe that the Holy Spirit inspired Luke and Paul to record the elements in Acts and in the Romans chapter 15, the markers of no place left, as a model, as a set of key result areas that every Pauline role globally needs to pursue. And the pursuit of those key result areas being engaging the fields, fully proclaiming the gospel, developing and mentoring disciples toward obedience in word and deed, forming churches, multiplying leaders, those key result areas toward a no place left vision, they are the kingdom agenda that is marching toward a second coming. I believe that. Anywhere, everywhere they're applied, it is our stewardship to steward sowers, the seed among the soil, right? By the power of the Spirit for the season, the time He's given us. Those 4 or 5 S's, all empowered again by the Spirit. Those are the stewards of a strategy coordinator, of a Pauline role, of the apostolic task, however you want to describe it. That is apostolic missiology, right? Taking up those stewardships, taking up those key results and marching. And I believe it with all my heart. In fact, we're banking our life on it at this point, considering it our life's work. Pursuing and stewarding those agendas, that is our role to play in ushering in of the King. And so if that's what you mean by where is Matthew 24 or Acts 1:8 involved in the pursuit of the no place left vision, I think the no place left vision is calling people to take up their stewardships toward the second coming. Engage the fields, sow the seed, make disciples who make disciples, form them into churches, and multiply leaders who can do the same. Tell me a better way to spend your life pursuing God's kingdom agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll do it.
Well, and this really ties well into Jared's video where he talked about the glory of God. And so you see these golden threads that weave throughout history, throughout the scriptures, where we're coming to a culmination time where God is ultimately glorified by the second coming, and then the great white throne judgment, the end and the beginning, really, and the glory of God weaving in and out of all of that is really, it makes the no place left vision something worth giving your life to, where in times in my life I'd given my life to lesser things only to bump up against this and go, wow, what was I thinking? And they were good things, even reach San Antonio for Christ. That's a good thing, but no place left. When you bump up against that, well, now it's ultimate. It's the end state, and it's what God is driving for. Complete, So, anyways, all that really inspires and convicts me and others to drive towards that grand goal. So,
Chuck, the first time, one of the first times I heard your name from Jeff Sundell, he had just tried to lay out the 5 levels of leadership and was talking about, by the time we get to multiple streams of multiple generations, like Galatia, Macedonia, Achaia, Phrygia, Asia, the Pauline ministry there. What's next? Once we get to a level 5 leader, call it the SC, call it the Paul, a full-blown CPM, multiple streams, multiple generations. What's level 6? He'd said that you asked him that. And somewhere about a week later, or not so long later, he came back, and I honestly didn't have an answer for you. He came back, and he said, Chuck told me he gets it. No place left is next.
yeah.
What's beyond the level 5 CPM, multiple streams and multiple generations? It is that fires are burning that have been organized into self-contained, self-propagating, self-governing, self-supporting, self-correcting units that can make sure there's wood on this fire and actually send and start other fires and burn the whole forest down. Mm-hmm. That's it. That's no place left, right? Mm-hmm. And Chuck, you put it together for me. He comes back and he says, Nathan, you're casting vision for level 5 leaders and you're casting vision for no place left. Level 5, what's next? No place left is next. It's Spain might be next, in our vision casting.
Right.
And what we leave behind, Brian, all those fires, all those campaigns working together to reset generationally and be able to maintain, to keep wood on the fire, and for that matter, send and start others. That's it.
And if we set, for lack of a better term, like if we set, this is a question. So if we set fires, if we set no place left fires, or God through us sets no place left fires of all the way to leadership development in every tribe, tongue, and language, then Matthew 24:14 will happen. Is that a correct understanding?
I think that it's inevitable. If that stewardship is picked up in the you know, let me say it this way: a lot of brothers who would criticize the missiological use of Matthew 24:14 are going to point to, and they're gonna throw in the pre-tribulation rapture kind of picture, and they try to go all theological on you to be able to say, well, really, God could accomplish Matthew 24:14 with the two witnesses. Within the tribulation, the two witnesses will come and proclaim. He doesn't need us to do that. Hold on. That he could. The truth is, he could do it that way. But man, when you go back and you read, the fact is, Jesus could have done that in AD 30. God has chosen to work through jars of clay, to hide the treasure in jars of clay, so that the all-surpassing power would be clearly seen from God, not from man, right? He's chosen to use the human agent throughout. Ephesians chapter, is it 1 or 2? It's chapter 2. That now the manifold wisdom of God, that even displayed in the heavenlies through the church, right? He's accomplished his task. He's bound himself to work through his redeemed army, through the priesthood that he's bought with his own blood, Revelation 5. In which case, whether or not we get to see it, whether or not we're a part of the generation that by which the knowledge of the glory of God covers the earth as the waters cover the sea, Habakkuk 2:14, or Matthew 24, that this gospel will be preached in the whole world, geographically, to all the nations, ethnic groups as well, your two targets, and then the end will come. Whether or not we're there to see it, why on earth wouldn't we pour every moment and every breath of our energy into pursuing it? It just doesn't make sense. Why would you argue against the church giving everything they've got to that task? How could we pursue that task with all our heart and be found with a lamp that's not trimmed, or a talent hidden in a hole? If we're pursuing that with all our heart, when he comes, we're ready to receive him. Well, my goodness, man. Let's make hay, man. Let's make haste. We better be prepared. Matthew 25, we're warned that if we're not ready, if we're not about those tasks, what happens? A sign out in a place of weeping and gnashing of teeth, or missing the bridegroom's coming. That's the two parables. That's not my words. That's Matthew 25. We know these things to be true. Philippians 1. What was Paul's prayer for the Philippians? Verse 9, verse 10. That they might grow in their knowledge of love, depth of insight, that their motives would be right? They might grow in their knowledge of love, depth of insight. They might discern what is best and be kept pure and blameless until the day of the Lord's coming. How do we know what's best? How do we grow in the knowledge of love, depth, and insight? We discern what is best. Brother, if Matthew 24 has set its hook in your heart, I can't imagine anything better in all the world that could happen than the second coming. You tell me what's better than the trumpet and the cloud. If that's best, and his appearing is awaiting every place and every people group, ethne, having a chance to hear, you know how to spend your life.